Assalamu alaikum, fam. Hope you're doing fantastic. So, the birds have calmed down, so hopefully they don't disturb us too much since I'm so close to their cage. But as I was reading the Jesuits' constitution, which I hope to, inshallah, learn about all the different orders, because I really want to be very well versed in theology and be able to bust through some myths and know who's lying and who isn't concerning certain facts. And the best way to do that is to read things for yourself. And further, I like having diverse knowledge. That way you don't really get burnt out on one another topic. You constantly are testing your mind in really different situations. So, in this chapter, we are in the second section where the candidates who are going to enter the Jesuit order are questioned. And so, what's interesting, they go on to say that you have to really be sincere in your questioning, and some of the answers that the person gives will really weigh heavy in, testing his sincerity and his soul. And that secrecy is not really going to be allowed. And first, it says they're obviously going to ask his name, nickname, what's he called, how old he is, and where he was born. And then there's going to be this really intense emphasis on being obliged to reveal what you concealed if you sinned by lying to the questioner. So you really gotta watch out. You cannot fool them. Very quite clearly, they don't want that. So there's other cool points in here, which shows you their vetting. So, you are going to be asked if you were a bastard or if your parents were married when you were born. Also, they're going to ask about your family heritage and if they were Christian and how long have they been Christians, like when they recently converted. I thought that was interesting. So, it's basically really getting to feel the waters on who you are as a person. They also are going to ask you about your ancestors' behavior towards the religion, and if they've committed any errors against the faith, and in what ways. This is quite interesting. And then they're going to ask you even more things about your parents. If they're well off, what are their names, how are they living, are they in temporal need, spiritual need. They really want to ask you. And you cannot be admitted to the order if your parents are in great need. Reminds me of when a young soldier asked the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, if he could go to battle. The Prophet, peace be upon him, told the young buck to tend to his parents, right? So this was a similarity I noticed between this mindset and the Prophet, peace be upon him. A duty towards parents is then quite clear in the Jesuits' constitution. You also have to relinquish your personal judgment to the society's or the society's superior concerning difficulties and doubts. So you really have to not practice any sort of deception. You need to open your mind to your superior and take counsel. And then they're also going to ask you about your siblings. How are they doing? If they're married, how many siblings you have, what do they do? How do they earn their living? And they're also going to ask you something interesting about if you are engaged or betrothed. Because, remember, you need the consent of your wife to enter the order. So if you are going to abandon your marriage, you have to say, what manner has that occurred? And how many children you have, if you have any. So it's not just how some people think where you show up and hey, I want to be part of them. They're like, come on in. They're also going to ask you about your debts and civil obligation. I find that debt question very interesting. You're also going to be tested in your reading and writing. How do you know how to read? And also if you've learned any manual trade. I thought that was cool. My grandfather told me that some orders, they make cheese and sell bread in order to pay the rent on the land. And then they're going to ask you if you've received any sacred orders and one of those sacred orders was to make a pilgrimage or do something else, you have to let them know. You can't hide that. It appears that this whole process is about finding out very detailed information. And then they're going to ask you what's been the manner of your conscience and what are you inclined towards. And what's really cool here, it says about prayer that you're going to ask you, like, how accustomed are you to praying during the day and the night? At what hour do you pray? What position of your body do you go in? And what prayers do you say? And how devoted are you to your prayers? And what is your spiritual experience during prayer? I was like, whoa, that was a shocker. Because I did not expect to see that. Then it says, like, you have to be really good at reading the text, good at conversations. Make sure that you've done divine services. They're also going to ask you how often you attended Mass. And, so they have sermons, which is like our khutbahs. So they're going to ask you all these type of questions. And they're also going to ask you, how often have you meditated and pondered on spiritual things? So I think some people mistakenly think you can be a criminal, run away to a order, live off of them, and then be totally bad and just have a free, easy living. Clearly, you can tell that the Jesuit order is going to find out who you are, and they're going to verify what you say. So you can't be doing that stuff, right? Which is good for them. Okay. And then he has to also let his certain cases and situations and difficulties, spiritual, material, again, they're going to reiterate, to be judged by the learned and virtuous in the society, and that you should follow their opinion, right? Reminds me of the ulama in Islam. Then, this is another cool point. You're not allowed too much, like say you have two people who give you an outside opinion, but for all matters of arbitration and difficulties, you need to keep it within the society. The people within the society should be given more weight in their opinion with concerning advice and how you're going to solve your issues. This reminded me of the Sharia, basically, the Quran and the Sunnah. Sunnah being the Sirah and the Hadith, the trilogy, essentially, of the three texts that help you to weigh things, and then having scholars. So it appears here the Jesuits as well want to keep their members of the order seeking advice from the learned people and to really respect the hierarchy. And then this is another cool point. It is about how determined are you to abandon the world. So they have a high respect for their hermit monastic types, their scholastics. They have respect for all their members. But the people who abandon the world and devote themselves to study really reminded me of myself, but also how we in Islam constantly say, this dunya is temporary, the real world is the akhirah, the hereafter. Here they really want to check you out, and they want to know how firm is the candidate in abandoning the world, and what were the signs and motivations to make the candidate want to abandon the world, right? And they want to know how you got to the conclusion of that, right? What was the way in which you got there? And are you deliberately able to determine to live without the world? And are you able to submit yourself essentially with deliberate determination to the order to die there? Are you prepared to vision yourself as someone who is going to stay within the society, being a member until your deathbed? And there's going to be more steps after this. So I found this to be pretty cool because they're really grilling you to find out and pick your brain, not only on who you are, what was your job, how many kids, how's your family, how are they doing, how was your spiritual journey, and then, they're going to vet you heavily before you can get in. They have a threshold of, like, who is allowed. And I don't think a lot of people know that till this day. I most certainly did not know, so I was very surprised to read some of these things that you see similarities. There's some common threads of how wise people behave, and as we know, the figure of Father Ignatius was a person who wrote in Spanish and in Latin, and he was able to get more opinions in Rome, obviously, from the members there, on how the Jesuits should write this constitution and how they should conduct their membership screenings. And this is part of that. So, very, very interesting. I did really like reading how they asked, have you wavered in this opinion to leave the world? Now this, okay, what I'm trying to say is, I've had sheikhs ask me, like, how did you convert? Like, how firm are you in wearing the niqab? Like, they ask you questions, and then you see the similarities here of, like, what the people in this order are going to ask. Because they're like, to what extent? What made you make this decision? How did this begin? Like, what were signs and motives? Because the signs and motives really showed how they have this example here in, did you come to the order through someone else or on your own? And if it was through another member of the society who moved you, that's meritorious, but you do need more time to spiritually progress and reflect on the matter before you can completely submit yourself to their society and God. So that's pretty interesting. So they want the person to really focus on their greater spiritual energies and giving greater service and glory to the divine majesty God. And I found this very interesting because they say, reverts, if they ever move to Saudi Arabia, you would have to have been a revert for a while, right? They want to make sure, like, are you ready for this? Do you know what's going on, right? Like, it's really quite interesting. So, I wanted to share those points with you. Totally nerdy. I mean, dang. This really demystifies some of the fake things you hear from others, but we'll see. We've still got like hundreds of pages more to go. Very thick constitution, over 500 pages long. Inshallah, we'll dig into all of it, and then if you ever meet a Jesuit and you've been watching these videos, you can be like, hey buddy, I know about your constitution. And imagine you know more than them just from watching these videos. It'd be funny. Alright fam, have a good day or night.